The 7,000-year history of humanity is about to end, not by nuclear war or alien invasion, but by the decision of the very gods who created it. To decide humanity's fate, the gods held a meeting in Valhalla's grand palace. There, the supreme god asked if humans should live for 1,000 more years or be exterminated. Most agreed they should vanish, having caused endless wars and destroyed the earth during the last millennium. As the supreme god was about to pass judgment with his hammer, the demigod Brunhilde appeared and stopped him. She acknowledged the disasters caused by humanity but deemed their erasure too cruel, proposing a chance: Ragnarok. The rules were clear: 13 gods versus 13 humans in individual duels. If humanity won 7 matches, they'd get 1,000 more years. If they lost, the gods would decide their ultimate destiny. Many gods laughed, thinking no human could defeat them. Brunhilde provoked them, accusing them of fearing a confrontation with men. This struck their divine pride, and the supreme god agreed to arrange Ragnarok. The news sparked euphoria in Valhalla, and Brunhilde was ordered to choose the 13 most powerful representatives ever. Soon after, the first match began in Valhalla's arena. Representing the gods was Thor, the god of thunder, Norse mythology's strongest, wielder of a hammer able to destroy continents in an instant. On the human side, his opponent, Lu Bu, the most feared warrior of China's Three Kingdoms era, rode his steed Red Hair with a fearless presence. While some doubted a human could resist, Brunhilde assured Lu Bu was a savage, fearsome fighter. A fearful monk began praying to the gods until Brunhilde scolded him. No one should pray for the enemy. In the arena, the god of thunder tore off his robe, preparing for combat, while Lu Bu summoned his celestial halberd, ready to face Thor. Cheering for the Chinese warrior were Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, along with numerous soldiers loyal to Lu Bu, eager to see their lord defeat the god of thunder. The master of ceremonies, the god Heimdall, blew his apocalyptic horn, officially beginning the grand battle between men and gods. The two warriors first slammed their weapons into the ground and stood still for a moment, then advanced towards each other without raising a defense. The gods were outraged as Lu Bu seemed to underestimate Thor, while Brunhilde was pleased with her champion's confidence. When they faced off, an overwhelming energy filled the air. Lu Bu raised his spear and attacked with direct force at Thor, who responded by blocking with his hammer. However, Lu Bu's battle cry increased his power and managed to push the god back. He didn't stop, charging again with the spear, but this time Thor repelled him with a blow, throwing him back. Both were experienced combatants with colossal strength, able to decide the fight with a single, fatal blow. No one could foresee the outcome. Humanity filled with pride, seeing Lu Bu fight on equal terms against such a powerful god, though the supreme god warned that Thor hadn't yet shown his full power. Suddenly, Thor retreated and began to concentrate lightning in his hands. Brunhilde worried, recognizing one of his most devastating techniques. Gathering enough electricity, Thor transferred it to his hammer, tensed his body back to gain momentum, and prepared to unleash it. The gods commented that although Lu Bu was just a mortal, Thor was employing tremendous force as a sign of respect for a worthy rival. Then, his past was recalled. Thor came from Asgard, a land surrounded by walls protecting it from the giants. The city's guardian angels often found their job boring, as the place was too peaceful, until an earthquake shook the walls, and 66 giants, reinforced with combat power, attacked en masse. The defensive formation was destroyed, and the angels mercilessly massacred, while the people still believed they were safe under the gods. They had always thought the giants acted alone, so they became complacent and neglected their defenses. This time, the joint attack brought Asgard to the brink of ruin. Amidst the chaos and fear, Thor appeared. Wielding his hammer with a single blow, he reduced the horde before him to rubble. Upon finishing, he showed no joy, but boredom, as to him, the massacre was just another tedious task. Perhaps those giants were too weak for Thor to bother caring about, honestly. The god of thunder's glorious feat was passed down by the gods to later generations, and they called his ultimate technique the thunder of the war god. Now, Thor was using that same technique against a mere mortal like Lu Bu, so all the gods thought the Chinese warrior would certainly die this time. Thor leaned back and unleashed a brutal blow with his hammer forward, shaking the entire Valhalla Colosseum. The released energy pushed back everyone near the center of the fight, but against all odds, Lu Bu was still alive. What's more, he had managed to slightly wound the god of thunder with his weapon. After that attack, Lu Bu burst out laughing. It was the first time his spear had managed to graze a deity. Thor, however, remained calm and said it was a pity he was just human. Had he belonged to the same race, they would have been comrades in arms, undoubtedly. According to the chronicles, Lu Bu came from the autonomous region of Inner Mongolia, and since birth, he possessed strength superior to any man's. That's why he always sought worthy rivals to fight. Anyone who stood in his path was defeated. After countless battles, his fame spread throughout China. After more than 30 years of wars, he concluded there was no one left in the world his equal. Thus, he let himself be captured by Cao Cao and accepted the death sentence. In his final moments, he begged to be killed quickly, as he was tired of a life without true rivals. And now, in Valhalla, he had finally found an opponent against whom he could unleash all his strength. The supreme god and his followers were surprised that Lu Bu resisted so much. According to him, Thor's hammer could destroy anything it touched, but the warrior's spear remained intact. Reflecting, he realized Brunhilde must have intervened to increase the human's strength. Before Ragnarok began, she already knew mortals were no match for the gods, as the latter possessed divine weapons fueled by celestial energy. Even if Lu Bu was the strongest of men, his weapon alone would be no more than a toy against a god. To balance the battle, Brunhilde summoned her 13 demigod sisters, known as the Valkyries, who would help humanity. Then she called one of them, named Randgriz. And after questioning her about the god of thunder's equipment, she learned that Thor possessed a glove capable of blocking any attack and a hammer capable of annihilating entire armies in an instant. Upon hearing it, Brunhilde considered him a cheater, as with such power, no one could face him on fair terms. Therefore, she asked Randgriz to give her body and transform into a divine weapon for Lu Bu. She accepted, collected all the warrior's memories, and took the form of the celestial halberd, the spear that had made him famous on every battlefield. Now, Lu Bu was euphoric, enjoying the combat, as he had a formidable rival before him and an indestructible divine weapon in his hands. He launched a direct attack, but Thor raised his gauntlet to block it. Everyone believed that piece was unbreakable. However, in just seconds, it completely disintegrated. It was no coincidence. Brunhilde had chosen Randgriz as her Valkyrie because her name meant armor breaker. The public was astonished to see Lu Bu destroy a divine weapon so easily. Men began to believe he would be the first to achieve the feat of defeating a god. His soldiers made the drums resonate to encourage him, while the strategist Shangong couldn't hold back tears of pride for his general. The gods, on the other hand, noticed that the Valkyries, whose original mission was to guide souls to the afterlife, had now decided to rebel and become weapons for humanity. Far from being angry, the supreme god showed himself excited by the situation. The old Zeus looked at Brunhilde with evident desire, while on the field, Lu Bu chained attacks that managed to wound Thor in various parts of the body. At that moment, Thor's hammer began to emit a scorching heat that disturbed Brunhilde. Lava flows ran through its interior and made it glow, accompanied by a rhythmic beat that resonated so powerfully that even the deaf could perceive it. It was the heart of the hammer, which had awakened as a living being. Many wondered if Thor, having lost a gauntlet, could still hold it, but the supreme god explained that the gauntlet was not used to wield it, but to contain its colossal power. Without it, Thor would have destroyed the weapon before it awakened. Immediately afterward, Thor threw the second gauntlet to the ground, and the colossal weight opened a huge crater. Humanity began to tremble in fear, while the gods celebrated in silence. The god of thunder raised the now awakened hammer. He called Lu Bu by his name and warned that he hoped to see him survive what he was about to unleash. The crowd roared with excitement, while Brunhilde checked in her device the list of the 13 humans chosen for Ragnarok, though some feared they were the last 13 men of the species. She laughed confidently, certain they were 13 assassins capable of humiliating the gods. At the same time, the supreme god also received the list of his champions and enjoyed seeing himself listed among them. Below, Thor concentrated all his strength into his ultimate technique, and the spectators awaited expectantly the power of the awakened hammer. In an instant, he launched it spinning with absolute precision against Lu Bu, an attack impossible to dodge, according to legends. However, the Chinese warrior leaned back at the right moment, and the hammer passed by, crashing into the stands, while Lu Bu straightened up with a smile full of jubilation. Then, Lu Bu launched directly at Thor when the god of thunder was off guard. But just as he was about to strike the blow with his spear, the hammer returned to its owner. Lu Bu reacted immediately, jumped high, spun in the air, and returned the hammer toward Thor, forcing the god to spend energy to stop it. Taking advantage of that instant, the warrior charged again, seeking a lethal blow. However, Thor's plan from the beginning had been to use the centrifugal force of the launch to prepare his decisive attack. With a brutal movement, Thor discharged the hammer directly against Lu Bu's face, causing an earthquake that shook the entire Colosseum. The light of the impact was so blinding that no one could see what was happening until it dissipated. To everyone's surprise, Lu Bu was still resisting, stopping the hammer with his enormous strength. Even Odin's ravens believed they were dreaming when they saw someone had stopped an attack from Thor. But Brunhilde noticed Lu Bu's legs were trembling from the pressure, and humanity's joy turned into anguish. Suddenly, one of his legs broke, causing him to bleed profusely. Desperate, he tried to move the hammer aside to regain balance, but the other leg also gave way. Forced to support himself by sticking his spear into the ground for the first time, he was seriously injured. The gods celebrated, and the supreme god enjoyed seeing humanity being subdued. He was convinced the fight would end soon, as Lu Bu could barely kneel without being able to get up. Even so, his face remained defiant without a trace of fear, even as Thor prepared the final blow. At that moment, Brunhilde heard hooves rumbling in the arena. Red Hair, Lu Bu's inseparable horse, burst into combat to support his master. Although he was just an animal, he knew his lord had fought bravely. Seeing him, Thor lowered the hammer, curious about what would happen. In the stands, Shengong was moved to see the horse didn't abandon him, and he incited the soldiers to chant Lu Bu's name. The entire public joined in, clamoring for him to rise and keep fighting. Shiva, among the gods, criticized the cruelty of the humans, who demanded a crippled man continue fighting, but other gods, fascinated, wanted to see how far that mortal could go. Amidst cheers, Lu Bu supported himself on his spear to rise. He gave a fierce cry that electrified the crowd, while the scarlet steed whinnied and jumped to encourage him. Thor smiled in satisfaction. His adversary still hadn't surrendered. Now, the horse had become the legs that supported the warrior. Since childhood, Lu Bu had seen lightning ignite a tree. Far from being frightened, it excited him, because in his child's mind, he believed a powerful being existed in the heavens waiting for him, and now the time had come to fight with all his strength against that dreamed rival. Hermes, upon seeing this, doubted whether Lu Bu was breaking the rule of the one-on-one combat, but the supreme god explained that the scarlet steed had become an extension of the warrior himself, so it was valid. Before entering battle, Lu Bu had asked his horse if he was willing to give his life for him. The animal whinnied strongly, and that filled the humans with hope. Mounted on his steed, Lu Bu galloped around Thor, seeking the right moment to attack, while the crowd still didn't understand his strategy. Lu Bu gripped the spear tightly and prepared to use his most devastating technique. Although he always had unparalleled strength, he never stopped training with his weapons. 1,000 times he wielded spears until he mastered a supreme blow called Sky Piercer, capable of splitting the firmament in two. In life, he couldn't show it, but now, after 1,000 years, he finally had the opportunity, and also with the divine spear of his Valkyrie. Thor, excited to face a rival who truly stimulated him, let the awakened hammer beat strongly, as if wanting to release all its power. Both prepared for their final clash. Thor executed his technique of unleashed lightning, and Lu Bu unleashed the Sky Piercer. When the two forces collided, the Valhalla Colosseum lit up completely, and the roar was deafening. When the light dissipated, Lu Bu was seriously wounded. The spear had been thrown away, and his Valkyrie lay broken. Brunhilde, seeing her sister sacrificed, held back tears, and her hatred towards the gods grew even more. Thor remained firm while Lu Bu's body was shattered. However, the warrior, satisfied to have given everything, advanced mounted on his horse towards his enemy. At that instant, his face returned to being that of a proud young man, the strongest of warriors. Thor did not hesitate and discharged the hammer, decapitating him in a final blow. Thus ended the first combat of Ragnarok with the victory of the gods. Lu Bu had fallen before Thor after 16 minutes and 28 seconds of battle. In the stands, Zeus was elated, and the other gods vibrated with excitement for having witnessed such a fierce duel. The three brothers, Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, desolate, raised their glasses in honor of the fallen, saying goodbye to him towards the afterlife. Meanwhile, the followers of the gods celebrated with shouts, convinced humanity was still far from being able to measure up to divinity. Gaul, furious, was indignant that such arrogant beings called themselves gods, but Brunhilde wasted no time on lamentations. She was already preparing for the next combat. After victory in the first combat, Thor left the arena, but his face showed no joy. He had considered Lu Bu a friend and regretted his fall. However, the Scarlet Steed and the soldiers loyal to the warrior declared that they would follow their lord to the end and launch themselves against Thor, even though the battle had already concluded. The god of thunder, thinking of giving a last gift to his fallen rival, raised the hammer and sent all his faithful with him. After they were annihilated, Gaul asked Brunhilde what happened to those who were destroyed there. She explained this was a battle of souls. When fragmented, they became irretrievable dust. That meant Lu Bu, his soldiers, and the Valkyrie Rangris were gone forever, without the possibility of rebirth. Gaul, indignant, reproached her sister's coldness, but Brunhilde knew lamenting would serve no purpose, and if she wanted to defeat the gods, she would have to sacrifice even more Valkyries. For her, humanity's fate always came first. Determined, she entered to prepare the next confrontation and encouraged Gaul not to look back, but to focus on the future and on choosing the most suitable fighter. Her younger sister, however, remained distressed. If someone as strong as Lu Bu had fallen, what hope was left? Brunhilde replied that she would now choose someone with the greatest hatred towards the gods, a special chosen one marked only with the number 0 and a 1 at the end. Although the Colosseum had been shattered, the gods restored it to continue Ragnarok. In the stands, humans and gods shouted at each other, sure that their side would triumph in the next round. Heimdall, master of ceremonies, introduced the new representative of humanity. A gate opened, and from the depths emerged a man who rose to the top of the arena, surrounded by animals that accompanied him. Heimdall announced that it was the first human being created by the gods, who now rose against his own creators. The man descended naked, though he improvised with a leaf to cover himself. It was none other than Adam, the father of humanity. After eating the forbidden fruit, the gods condemned him and banished him to the world of men. Since then, he harbored a deep resentment towards them and was willing to settle accounts. Humanity celebrated excitedly, seeing their progenitor in the arena, while the gods despised him as a frail young man. If Lubu had died, they believed Adam wouldn't last more than a few minutes. However, the goddess Aphrodite was delighted with him, saying he was too beautiful, and if he were hers, she wouldn't let him escape. At that moment, Heimdall received a notice. The gods had decided to alter the order of combat. A melody sounded in honor of the arrival of Zeus, who would be Adam's opponent in the second confrontation of Ragnarok. Everyone initially thought this was a joke, as the one coming down to fight Adam was a stooped old man who now claimed his turn in the arena. Before starting, he asked Hermes to play music to do a warm-up dance. While in the stands, the gods chanted his name and called him the godfather of the universe, creator of all that exists. The humans, on the other hand, seethed with rage. His body looked like a dry log, and yet he pretended to show off. But upon finishing the exhibition, his body suddenly transformed. His muscles exploded in size, and Zeus became a colossus. The gods roared with excitement, while Brunhilde became uneasy. She and her sister Gaul thought Zeus was the final boss and should appear in the last fight. Even so, the god radiated enthusiasm. Originally, the one designated to face Adam was Shiva, who was ready to fight, but Zeus stepped forward and snatched his turn. Furious, Shiva wanted to face him right there, though he soon understood the difference in power. A single arm of Zeus was enough to knock him almost to the ground. Shiva, powerless, challenged him to decide who would fight Adam, but upon crossing glances, he understood he was at a disadvantage and yielded, though he swore revenge on another occasion. Since Zeus abandoned his chair as president, his son Ares temporarily took that place. In the arena, Zeus observed that Adam carried nothing and doubted what his Valkyrie weapon would be. If he didn't have one, he would fall in an instant. Adam replied that his partner had just arrived. In the sky appeared a young demigoddess mounted on a Pegasus. It was Regenlife, carefully chosen by Brunhilde as the most suitable weapon for him. The Valkyrie descended, extended her hand towards Adam, and joining wills, transformed, enveloping his arm. When the light went out, it had become an enormous iron fist. The public was surprised, but Adam smiled in satisfaction, and Zeus, amused, commented that he liked it because he was also a fist fighter. Heimdall announced the official start of the combat. Before starting, Adam addressed Zeus, calling him an old friend and asking where his weapon was. Zeus, confident, replied that the gods didn't need any. Controversy erupted in the stands. Adam seemed to be despising a supreme deity, and Zeus swore he wouldn't miss a single blow until he left him humiliated. Immediately afterward, he launched against Adam at the speed of light and threw a deadly punch. But the first man, with inhuman reflexes, barely tilted his head and dodged the attack, leaving Zeus punching the air. Adam's children proudly celebrated that their father could stand up to such a feared god. In contrast, Ares, son of Zeus, despised humans, saying they were fools for celebrating as if it were a victory, the mere fact of dodging a blow. In the arena, Zeus launched a barrage of punches, a whirlwind called Fists of the Ocasus, but none reached Adam. The first man dodged elegantly, showing no fear. Frustrated, Zeus moved on to use his legs, as heavy as an axe capable of splitting anyone in two. However, Adam jumped at the right instant and avoided the impact. The god, annoyed because his rival only dodged, warned him that sooner or later he would receive a blow. Adam knew it, so he counterattacked with a punch to the face, making him bleed. Zeus couldn't believe someone was faster than him. Then Adam chained attacks, replicating his movements exactly. He even executed the Fists of the Ocasus with the speed of fractions of a second, hitting the god again and again. Finally, he applied a kick identical to his, shattering his leg. Although he was receiving a beating, Zeus showed a strange pleasure with a grotesque expression. Gaul was surprised that Adam could copy all the divine techniques. Brunhilde explained that, being created in the image of the gods, Adam possessed the ability to imitate any movement of them. That power resided in his eyes, known as divine vision. It was enough to see a technique once to reproduce it without error. Zeus did not accept such power, began to spin, dancing and running in circles around Adam, seeking an angle of attack. But when he launched a kick, Adam dodged it easily and counterattacked using the same posture, impacting fully on his face and throwing him dozens of meters. No one could believe what they saw, an all-powerful god being humiliated in that way by a human. Zeus himself had the feeling of fighting against a reflection of himself. To top it off, Adam called him a useless old man, which provoked laughter from the public. Furious, Zeus further increased the size of his body and prepared for his ultimate blow. Blowing on his fist, he charged an ancestral technique that went back to the times when the universe was barely born. Then, being young, he had fought against his own father for the throne of the most powerful, and, although he defeated him, he received a blow to the jaw that not even he could foresee. After years of perfection, he had inherited that technique and baptized it as the fist that transcends time. By concentrating all his energy, time seemed to stop. Zeus advanced at an impossible speed, willing to end Adam. But the man not only copied the movement on the spot, but executed it with greater force, hitting Zeus even harder than his father had done. When the temporal flow returned, everyone was astonished. Zeus lay on the ground before Adam. Seeing his father receive such punishment, Ares, god of war, declared with astonishment that techniques like the fists of the Occasus or the divine kick were impossible to follow for anyone except for that man. Ares was the only one who managed to see, even if only for an instant, what had happened. In the combat against Adam, he clearly saw Zeus launch a blow, but upon finishing the sequence, it was the god who came flying with a punch to the face. That made him wonder if Adam possessed a speed even superior to that of Zeus himself. Hermes intervened, saying that Adam's copying ability was not simple at all. In a fraction of a second, he had dodged and counterattacked before the old man could react. Ares, annoyed that Hermes had observed better than him, was about to fight with his brother right there. But out of respect for Zeus, he stopped his fury. In the arena, Zeus was still unable to get up. Heimdall shouted that this was the first miracle in the history of the universe. Brunhild then explained that Adam's strength came above all from his hatred towards the gods. Time ago, Adam lived in Eden with all the creatures and alongside Eve, in what was for him a perfect paradise. But one day, a trial was held against his wife. A serpent god accused her of having eaten the forbidden fruit. In reality, the serpent had tried to possess Eve, and failing, a fruit fell on his head. Then, to avenge himself, he bit it and blamed Eve. Although it was slander, the gods believed him and demanded her expulsion from Eden. The serpent god celebrated his revenge while Eve cried. At that moment, the door of the court was kicked open. A guard lay on the ground, and the one who entered was Adam, with a basket full of forbidden fruits. In front of the gods, he bit an apple and spat it out, saying it was too sour. He repeated the same with several more, throwing them on the ground while the divinities watched him furiously without daring to act. Then he approached Eve and told her that if she was expelled, he would leave with her. His words filled her with joy and the serpent with rage. The false god then adopted the form of a giant lizard to attack Adam, but the first man was determined to face him for having made his wife cry. When the creature attacked him with its claws, Adam instantly copied its movements and, in a few seconds, tore it to pieces. Afterward, he took Eve's hand and led her out of Eden, promising her they would build their own paradise together. Now, in front of the gods, that same hatred was reborn, and Brunhilde laughed, believing she had secured a miraculous victory for humanity. But her smile vanished when Zeus suddenly sat up. Although his head had been twisted backward, it was enough for him to turn it to reposition it. From the stands, the gods burst into cheers, seeing that their lord still hadn't fallen. Zeus seemed to have lost much of his strength after using the fists of the Occasus and receiving Adam's rain of blows. Then, he commented that he no longer saw the fire of hatred in the eyes of his rival, and asked him what his real reason was for wanting to destroy the gods. Adam replied immediately, he was not there to avenge the past, but to protect all his descendants, humanity. The human stands burst with pride, praying for the victory of their primordial father. Zeus, jealous of seeing how Adam received the fervor of the crowd, heard his enemy's warning. In the next attack, he could end up on the ground. He no longer underestimated him and promised to release all his power. The god hardened every muscle in his body, and some thought he had become senile, but Loki appeared and revealed that, after 1,000 years, he was once again witnessing Zeus's final transformation. Adam, therefore, was fortunate. He would face him in his most powerful form. When the process ended, the pressure of energy was so great that even the children cried, and Brunhilde and Gaul themselves trembled. Zeus had compressed his muscles to the maximum, accumulating an energy capable of generating the fastest and most devastating blows ever seen. According to Hermes, the old man could barely sustain that form for 5 minutes, and it remained to be seen whether he would manage to defeat Adam in that lapse of time. The god of thunder lashed out with his first punches, but Adam used his divine vision to copy them and respond in the same way. For every blow, he returned an identical one, and the balance returned to tilt towards the human side. The audience trusted Adam to win, though Brunhild noticed something strange. In the arena, Adam spat blood despite dodging and replicating every attack. She understood. Zeus had only launched decisive blows, and by copying them over and over, Adam was pushing his body to the absolute limit. His nervous system was suffering devastating damage. The old man, aware of imitation's weakness, had planned that exact strategy. But Zeus wasn't unscathed either. His muscles were tearing under the strain. Loki compared it to two wine glasses filled to the brim. The one that spilled over first would be the loser. Whoever lasted until the end would be the victor. Thus, every attack from Zeus was answered by Adam in the same way, standing firm, returning blows with precision. Neither yielded because both of their lives depended on that rain of impacts. The spectacle was so overwhelming that the entire stadium stood up to witness it better. Even Ares, god of war, stood up as well. It was the first time he'd seen such a fight. Brunhilde was deeply distressed by Adam's condition, unsure if he could withstand a god as imposing as Zeus. In the stands, the first man's family prayed for him, while all of Valhalla roared with excitement, but danger loomed over Adam. He had strained his divine vision too much, and his brain couldn't take it anymore, going completely blind. Zeus seized the opportunity and landed a brutal punch on his face, forcing him to retreat. The fight changed course. Now, the god attacked relentlessly, and Adam could barely defend himself. Adam's glass had already overflowed, and Loki assumed he would lose. Eve and her children begged him to stop, and all of humanity implored their father to stop fighting, as defeat seemed inevitable. At that moment, Adam heard a child crying in the stands, and moved, promised he would remain there protecting his descendants. He took a direct hit from Zeus, but, at the same time, grabbed his head. Then, both clung to each other and began exchanging a rain of punches to each other's faces, while the crowd held its breath awaiting the outcome. When the storm of blows ended, it was Zeus who fell first. His compressed muscles evaporated, leaving him as a withered skeleton. The humans erupted in jubilation, believing that their father had won. However, Eve and the others were immediately horrified to discover that Adam had died standing up without anyone noticing. Zeus, far from mocking, recognized his greatness. If it had been a competition of endurance, he would have lost indeed. Adam's soul and the Valkyrie accompanying him disintegrated into fragments. The victor of the second Ragnarok match was Zeus. Humanity, although closer to the abyss, held its head high and felt proud that their progenitor had fought with such valor to protect his children. After the battle, Gaul wondered why the Valkyrie Regenlife had had to sacrifice herself if Adam's body remained intact. Another Valkyrie named Hrist explained that when human and Valkyrie fight together, their bodies merge into one to unleash their maximum power. Therefore, if they lose, both share the same fate and vanish together. Though normally serene, Hrist erupted in fury and vowed to end all the gods to avenge her sister. Her character changed abruptly as she harbored two opposing forces within herself. Meanwhile, Brunhilde devoured pastries with evident anger. Humanity had already lost 2 matches, and they had to win the next one at all costs. Then she received a message on her device and, startled, dropped the plates. The next representative of the gods would be the Lord of the Seas, Poseidon, brother of Zeus, an extremely powerful and cruel being. Gaul was worried because the gods were sending formidable fighters from the very beginning of the tournament. Brunhilde, however, told her to shut up. She had to concentrate to calmly choose the next warrior for humanity. After reviewing the candidates, she was overcome with despair as she didn't know who to pick. Just at that moment, an old man approached Brunhilde from behind and said that he would be the next to fight. It was Sasaki Kojiro, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. Everyone was surprised to see him because while the other warriors appeared in the prime of their youth, Kojiro retained an aged appearance. However, he demonstrated his skill immediately. He caught with his sword the pitcher of milk that Brunhilde had dropped and drank its contents calmly. He explained that he had died 400 years ago, but since then he had never stopped training and was now at his peak, full of power. Seeing his confidence, Brunhilde felt hopeful. The combat stage transformed into an open sea. Heimdall announced that the third battle was about to begin. When the gates opened, water flooded the arena, but Poseidon, with a single stomp, parted the waters to make his way through. He advanced slowly under the cheers of the gods. He was the Lord of the Seas, feared by all, and no one dared to irritate him. As soon as he reached the center, he insulted other gods with contempt, who remained silent out of fear. Heimdall then introduced his opponent, a man who, even after death, never stopped perfecting himself. A swordsman considered a loser in life, but also the greatest of all, Sasaki Kojiro. Among the humans there was no hope, as they saw him as too old against a young and terrifying rival like Poseidon. However, those who encouraged him were the same swordsmen who had been defeated by him, and even his eternal rival, Musashi, who recognized his greatness. While the crowd belittled him, Brunhilde fully trusted in his victory. Kojiro gently tapped the ground with his sword, and immediately the murmuring ceased and even the waters calmed. The gods began to look at him with respect. and Musashi tore up all the manuscripts of his clan upon accepting that he was no longer a worthy rival of Kojiro. At that instant, everyone understood that the old man had reached the pinnacle of the art of the sword and that he was ready to face the god of the oceans. When Heimdall gave the starting signal, the atmosphere became extremely tense. Neither attacked first. Both awaited the opportunity to counterattack without showing the slightest opening. Kojiro mentally analyzed multiple strategies to attack Poseidon, but each one ended in his immediate death under the god's spear. He calculated up to 18 different ways, and in all of them he died impaled. Sweat began to run down his forehead. His adversary was too powerful. Walt commented that Poseidon must be the strongest among the 12 gods of Olympus, but Brunhilde told him the true story. In the beginning, Olympus didn't have 12 but 13 gods. One of them, Adamas, older brother of Zeus and Poseidon, died at the hands of the latter. After the victory against the Titans, Zeus was proclaimed the most powerful god of the skies. This caused Adamas to feel enormous envy, as Zeus was the youngest of the brothers and yet he was proclaimed the most powerful. Then, he freed numerous Titans, in addition to forcing Typhon, the most fearsome beast of the sky, to follow his orders. He gathered several gods in a rebellion with the purpose of destroying Zeus. Only Poseidon remained, whom he tried to convince personally, but the god of the sea despised him, calling him a pathetic being. According to Poseidon, the gods were born as perfect beings, and Adamas had contaminated that perfection with intrigues and deceptions against his own. Full of rage, Adamas unsheathed a scythe to confront him, demanding that he at least look him in the eyes as a true brother. Poseidon did so, but it was the last time. He immediately pierced his abdomen with his spear, putting an end to his life. From that day on, the story was rewritten. In Olympus, only 12 gods had existed. Ares heard Hermes' story and was astonished. Unable to believe that Adamas had been eliminated with a single blow, Hermes added that what was truly terrifying was not the death, but that Poseidon erased him from his memory as if he had never existed. No one dared to contradict the god of the sea, who rose above all. In the arena, meanwhile, Kojiro had calculated countless ways to attack Poseidon, all without success. The god didn't even look at him, remaining indifferent. Tired, the swordsman slumped down to rest his legs. Throughout his life, Kojiro had never won a single duel. From childhood, he was a lazy and distracted boy, always arriving late to the dojo, which angered the others. However, his mastery of the sword was uncommon. He could have even defeated his burly companion Kagekatsu, but he preferred to hide his abilities. That's why, when they faced each other, he let himself lose in order for him to forgive him for his tardiness. When the master asked him why, he would answer, "If I know I can't win, why bother?" Those words made them consider him useless for the art of the sword, more suited to dedicating himself to commerce, but they were wrong. Kojiro learned from nature itself, observing the agility of animals like rabbits to imitate their movements, and upon noticing his slender body, he decided to eat more meat to develop muscles. At night, he studied how wild beasts fought and trained on his own. After 6 months of hard practice in the forests, he returned to the dojo transformed, with an imposing physique that surprised everyone. Kagekatsu challenged him to a fight to measure his progress, but Kojiro refused, not wanting to spill his blood there. Believing that he was belittling him, Kagekatsu burned with anger. When Kagekatsu approached Kojiro, he felt that he could be split in two at any moment, so he fell to his knees and surrendered. After his days of hard training, Kojiro longed to face his master Saigen, and being in front of that colossus, he couldn't hide his enthusiasm. No one knew the result of that duel, but since then, Kojiro returned to the solitude of the forest. Years later, his master visited him, already almost blind. Upon entering the house, he perceived the traces of Kojiro's discipline. Every column and every corner was marked with countless cuts from wooden swords. None of the dojo's best disciples were a match for him anymore. In a corner, he found a huge gash with a note bearing his name, proof that Kojiro had surpassed the master himself. The master offered him to become feudal lord of the region, but Kojiro preferred to wander in search of more powerful opponents. Since then, he lost countless fights, but each defeat left him with experience and new lessons. He was like a thirsty beast, always wanting to measure his strength against formidable warriors. Over time, he perfected incredible techniques. Even a bird flying at high altitude could be split in two with a single slash. His name ended up entering history as the defeated but greatest swordsman of all time. Back in the fight, after sitting for a long time and without Poseidon attacking, Kojiro had no other option but to get up and take the initiative. In other circumstances, he could have surrendered, but now, with masters and former rivals watching from the stands, fleeing would be a disgrace. He brandished his meter-long sword and launched himself against the god of the sea. The slash fell with all its force, but Poseidon dodged it lightly. The inertia of the heavy blade left Kojiro exposed, and the god tried to counterattack with his trident. However, Kojiro turned the sword upward with his strength and executed the swallow cut technique, inspired by the bird that flies at over 200 kilometers per hour. The blade surprised the god, tearing off some of his hair. It was the first time Poseidon gave him a glance. In the stands, Musashi recalled how that same technique had almost cost him an eye in his youth. The human side regained hope. Kojiro had demonstrated his mastery, and his sword had been forged by the Valkyrie Hrist, the second most powerful of the 13 demigod sisters. Poseidon, noticing his trimmed mane, was enraged. With a cold face and murderous aura, he advanced and adopted an attack position. He took a deep breath and launched a barrage of invisible thrusts. Kojiro, though not as fast as Adam, used his instinct, the experience of countless defeats, and his gift for anticipating fights. Thus, he managed to skillfully dodge the blows, while, in his mind, he reproduced and calculated each of Poseidon's movements. After more than 1,000 simulations, Kojiro managed to decipher the god of the sea's movements. If Adam was the fastest counterattacking, Kojiro was the best at reading movements. Thus, no matter how Poseidon attacked, he could always anticipate and dodge. Howard's exhibition is speechless. He never would have believed that a human could reach such a level. On the battlefield, Poseidon suddenly whistled loudly, preparing his next attack. He gripped the trident and launched himself with superhuman speed, so great that Kojiro couldn't react and received a stab that grazed his abdomen, causing him to lose a lot of blood and fall to his knees. It was then that, for the first time, the god of the sea spoke, mocking Kojiro by calling him a loser. Despite the pain, Kojiro got up ready to endure more attacks. In the stands, gods cheered Poseidon as the number one, while a group of young followers cheered him enthusiastically, but that irritated him and, with a single glaring look, he reduced them to absolute silence. Kojiro was surprised. He understood how someone could despise the support of their own followers. Poseidon responded coldly. The gods didn't need friends or depend on anyone, because they had been born perfect. Kojiro, disappointed, replied that, from his perspective, the gods were a pathetic existence. The provocation ignited Poseidon's anger even further, unleashing a series of ferocious thrusts. His attacks were so intense that Kojiro could barely resist, and the divine technique called Marine Thunder seemed capable of leveling the entire Colosseum. According to Hermes, that was only a fraction of Poseidon's power. Not even other gods had yet seen all of his strength. But what no one suspected was that, the more Kojiro fought, the more he evolved and adapted, reaching a state close to that of the gods themselves, the mastery of the Thousand Hands immaculate. Even so, his rival was Poseidon, the god above all. After containing an offensive, Kojiro went on the counterattack, but the god dodged with ease, placed himself behind him, and aimed at the blind spot with his trident. Although Kojiro managed to react, he was forced back on the defensive. The difference in power was so great that he felt as if he were sinking into the depths of the ocean. Even so, he was determined to touch, even if just once, the god of the sea. Dodging the trident's onslaught, Kojiro got close enough to launch a slash, and when Poseidon retreated, he turned the sword to continue with another offensive. But the god's speed was such that he again positioned himself behind him, and with a blow from his trident, split the Valkyrie sword in two. Gaul cried out in despair, fearing that her sister Hrist had died. Ares assured that everything was over, since Kojiro no longer had a divine weapon. Amidst the despair of humanity, Kojiro showed no fear whatsoever. He looked at the remains of his sword and remembered his past with his eternal rival Musashi, with whom he had waged an endless duel on a distant island. Against a rival as powerful as Musashi, Kojiro often thought of surrendering to save his life, but the emotion dominated him, and he raised his sword to continue fighting. Musashi, perceiving his opponent's determination, also gave it his all. The fight only lasted a few more minutes, but both were satisfied. Kojiro left him with one more scar on his face, while Musashi finished him off with his dual sword technique. In his last moments, Kojiro still wished to hold the sword and fight a little more. Now, instead of being in front of Musashi, he was fighting against someone much stronger. Then, he asked Poseidon if he had ever trained with effort, if he had shed tears of gratitude towards a rival. He concluded that a god like him would never experience that, since he had already been born with power and didn't need to train. In his hands, the sword carried the will of all his comrades, so he wouldn't allow himself to fall there. Then the broken blade suddenly shone, leaving everyone surprised. From that light, Hrist appeared to help him recompose his divine weapon. As the glow dissipated, Kojiro held two swords. Gaul celebrated happily because her sister Hrist was still alive, while Brunhilde explained that she possessed two opposing natures, one gentle and one violent, and that's why the rupture had separated the energy into two swords. Gaul praised her for her wise choice, although in reality it had been pure luck, so much so that Brunhilde shouted like crazy with joy. In the arena, the fight continued with renewed violence. Both warriors lunged with lethal movements. Kojiro employed Musashi's dual sword stance to block the trident, and along with it, all the techniques he had learned from his past masters and rivals. It was as if their spirits lived within him, giving him strength. For the first time, Kojiro managed to make cuts on Poseidon's body. The god of the sea was covered in wounds, leaving the spectator gods astonished and filling with hope the humanity that cheered him fervently. Kojiro was facing the great opportunity to be humanity's first godslayer. However, Poseidon maintained his composure. He ran the blood through his hair with an arrogant air and, determined to get serious, brandished the trident, wounding Kojiro's shoulder. The samurai retreated to adjust his position, but this time, the god attacked without embellishments, directly and brutally. Although Kojiro managed to see his attacks, they were too fast to dodge. After several thrusts, Poseidon changed his rhythm and began to move with extreme speed, attacking him in an arc pattern. Within that maelstrom, Kojiro had to fight with all his might to withstand the blows coming from all directions. At that moment, Kojiro felt that he had hit rock bottom in hope. He understood that the distance between the strength of a man and that of a god was too great to reach. His life had always been marked by the title of loser, so one more defeat wouldn't be any different. However, the strength of friendship and of his comrades within him didn't allow him to surrender. From the stands, the swordsmen began to chant his name, giving him courage. They knew that he still held power without showing it, and thanks to that encouragement, Kojiro stopped thinking about retreating. He would fight to obtain the first victory of his life. Although bleeding excessively, he decided to wait for the right moment to reverse the situation. Thus, after an attack from the god of the sea, he deflected the trident with his sword and, at that instant, awakened his combat imitation ability in its fullest expression. Now he could read every movement of the god without fail. Kojiro dodged the attacks and advanced straight towards his rival. The gods in the stands couldn't believe what they were seeing. As he approached, it became clear that it was the decisive moment. With the twin swords technique, 1,000 cuts of the chaotic tiger, Kojiro severed the trident along with one of Poseidon's arms. When he tried to counterattack with the other hand, he also lost it. Desperate, the god took the trident with his mouth, but Kojiro executed 2 lethal slashes that split him into multiple pieces. All of humanity celebrated euphorically, and Kojiro looked radiant. It was humanity's first victory and the first in his entire career as a swordsman. Immediately, Heimdall announced that the victor of the third match of Ragnarok was Sasaki Kojiro. The gods remained incredulous, unable to accept that their most powerful warrior had fallen. In front of them, the soul of the god of the sea was fading into dust. Kojiro, exhausted, thanked all his comrades and rivals who encouraged him. Brunhilde wished that this victory would make the gods reflect so that they would stop belittling humans. Odin was furious, and Loki could no longer take Ragnarok as a simple game, not when a god had fallen before a mortal. The path back opened before Kojiro, but his body couldn't take it anymore. Then, the Valkyrie Hrist manifested to support him, reaffirming before Gaul and Brunhilde her oath of victory. Gaul was happy. Although Brunhilde remained serious, it was only the first triumph. They still needed 6 more. Meanwhile, Zeus, despite having received many blows, had to receive the other gods in his hall. Shiva, irritated by Poseidon's defeat, was annoyed to see that Zeus remained indifferent, but Zeus recognized that Kojiro had been too strong. That's why the god of the sea fell. He also recalled that the essence of Ragnarok was to demonstrate that humans could have a power comparable to that of the gods. Furthermore, at this moment, Brunhilde had the firm intention of defeating the gods, so everyone had to fight with total seriousness. Shiva, upon hearing him, wanted to present himself in the next fight. However, the Greek gods, full of rancor, affirmed that it was their personal revenge, and since Shiva was a Hindu god, he had to give his place to another representative. Before the battle began, Brunhilde whispered something to Hermes, but when Gaul went to ask her, she revealed nothing. Shortly after, Heimdall appeared to announce that the 4th match of Ragnarok was about to begin. The arena transformed into a recreation of 19th century London. That request had come from the human representative, and surprisingly, the rival god accepted the scenario without hesitation. The Divine Side audience did not understand which god would agree to fight in such a place, nor who would be the human who had requested such a peculiar battlefield. From the shadows appeared the 4th representative of humanity, a cruel being who had sown terror throughout London. The most feared serial killer in history was Jack the Ripper, author of mysterious, unsolvable crimes. Upon seeing him, the human crowd was horrified. How could they have such a criminal as their defender? Meanwhile, Loki understood that Brunhilde was willing to use any resource to ensure victory, and the opponent chosen by the gods would not be someone common. Hercules, the hero who subdued the Nemean lion and the 3-headed dog Cerberus. After successfully completing the 12 labors, he was recognized as a demigod. Thus, Hercules represented justice, while Jack symbolized evil. Who would triumph in this clash between virtue and darkness? Could humanity prevail, or would it be destroyed by the gods? Just before the start, Brunhilde reflected that after their previous defeat, the gods would surely send an extremely strong rival. And indeed, Hercules appeared, presenting himself as the next divine representative. Gaul was very happy to see him again after so long, and Brunhilde herself showed respect, as she considered him a superior. But upon confirming that he would be the adversary of the humans, her face changed. Hercules was now the obstacle that had to be overcome. She could only wish him luck in the battle. When Hercules was preparing, Loki approached to mock him, calling him a half-breed for his closeness to the Valkyries. But Hercules responded firmly that, as a representative of the gods, he would give his best. Although he opposed the extinction of humanity, having accepted to fight in Ragnarok, he couldn't allow himself to lose. That left Loki intrigued, wondering which side he was really on. Hercules replied that he didn't belong to any side, but only to justice. Meanwhile, many didn't know who to support. Gaul was undecided, and Brunhilde, laughing, affirmed that she had chosen the perfect rival to face Hercules, a miserable being whom she despised the most, a human waste known as Jack the Ripper. At that moment, Gaul was speechless, unable to understand how her sister had chosen a murderer to represent humanity. Hercules, for his part, was furious to discover that his opponent was a despicable being like Jack, when before the human representatives had been warriors worthy of respect. He shouted angrily at Brunhild for having forced him to fight against such an individual. Even among the humans, many didn't know who to cheer for, as Jack represented a shame for them. However, some didn't know who he really was, until Charlotte Holmes revealed that he was the murderer she had never been able to catch in her entire life. Before starting the fight, Hercules offered Jack a way out. If he surrendered immediately, he would intercede with Zeus to ensure that his soul remained safe. Jack, with a courteous smile, thanked him for his consideration, but affirmed that as a gentleman, he couldn't refuse a duel. Upon drawing his weapon, many thought they were twin swords like Kojiro's, but, in reality, they were two halves of a divine scissor forged by a Valkyrie. Everyone agreed that it was the perfect weapon for a killer like him. Hercules, outraged, promised to end him with all his strength, but as soon as he said it, Jack ran away, leaving Hercules bewildered. The demigod chased him to an alley where he perceived a strange aroma. There was Jack, sitting calmly drinking tea, inviting him to share a cup. Hercules rejected with disdain and advanced towards him, when suddenly he noticed an almost invisible thread. Upon breaking it, a rain of blades fell on him, but none could damage his robust body. Then he declared that human weapons couldn't affect the gods. Jack, unperturbed, replied that he never trusted anyone and that he always had to check it for himself. Hercules advanced, determined to finish him off, but Jack fired a hook from his gun to climb a wall and maintain distance. The demigod jumped with great force to reach him, and with his mace, he gave a blow so powerful that he destroyed Jack's scissors. The humans believed that his end had come, as he had run out of divine weapon, but Jack, without showing fear, leaned against a wall and threw a rain of knives from his bag. Hercules, confident, thought they were simple common weapons until he felt his skin being pierced. Wounded and surprised, he didn't understand how it was possible, as then he revealed the truth. The scissors were a deception. His real divine weapon was the bag he carried with him, capable of generating small weapons like knives, perfect for a killer like him. The gods began to worry, while among the humans, the hope of a new victory was reborn. Gaul, however, didn't understand why Brunhilde had chosen such an infamous criminal, but she explained that Jack's cruelty and cunning were precisely the weapon they needed to face a god as just and honorable as Hercules. At that moment, Jack was enjoying seeing Hercules wounded. He even pretended to pray that the gods would protect him and allow him to survive. Hercules, outraged, was furious because Jack was only resorting to dirty tricks. When the killer launched a rain of knives, Hercules managed to deflect several with his mace, but Jack constantly changed the trajectory of the projectiles, wounding him in different parts of the body. Even so, the demigod continued to advance, and after destroying the arsenal of knives, raised his mace ready to crush him right there. Jack reacted quickly, took out two pieces of an umbrella, joined them, and spun it with force, deflecting the blow. Faced with this, Hercules recognized that his rival was not as cowardly as he seemed, although Jack continued to play with him, forcing him to unleash a new power. The marks on his body began to expand, and his mace transformed into the form of the Nemean lion, one of his 12 labors. With one blow, he unleashed the beast's strength, throwing Jack against the wall. Many thought he had died, but Jack got up slowly and rearranged his dislocated bones as if nothing had happened. His philosophy was simple: if you learn to enjoy the pain, it stops affecting you. According to him, that had only been a warm-up. Then, he took out a huge knife ready for the second round. Meanwhile, the tattoos on Hercules' body continued to spread. Ares explained that each one represented one of his 12 feats, and that, by using those divine techniques, he paid a high price. The pain ran through every part of his body marked by the inscriptions, surprising him to see how he kept his face firm without showing suffering. Ares added that if the tattoos covered his entire body, he would die, and his soul would vanish. But even so, he trusted him. His true strength was not physical, but the unyielding will that drove him to fight. Since childhood, Hercules had always defended justice. Once, when a friend of his was beaten and had a calf stolen from him, he didn't hesitate to confront the abusers to recover it. Although both ended up battered, he felt proud to have done the right thing, weak and thin. He was always first to take risks, be it fights or houses. His goal? Protect the weak, fight for justice. One night, villagers hunted a massive boar. Hercules refused to eat, having not helped in the hunt. That's when the bullies provoked him, mocking that no matter how hard he trained, he'd never be stronger. They dared him to drink from Zeus's temple water, which legend said was the god's blood. A true hero would become immortal, but a fake would die instantly. They called him useless, saying he'd drop dead if he drank it. But Hercules, craving the strength to uphold justice, unhesitatingly chose the hardest path, willing to risk all for strength. And after all his effort and training, no one ever mocked him, calling him weak again. About this time, the gods gathered to decide humanity's fate. Most agreed to grant 1,000 more years, but Aphrodite wanted to teach them a lesson, men constantly causing wars and extinction. Finally, Ares took on the task of punishing them, descending with his divine hosts to judge mortals. Unable to resist, humans could only impotently pray, except for Hercules, who stepped forward to protect them all. Armed with his club, he charged Ares, only to be kicked against a wall. Still, he used his last strength to slow the war god, holding him off. Ares, intrigued, offered to spare his life if he surrendered, but Hercules, believing it unfair for those who created humans to arbitrarily punish them despite their prayers, risked his life to stop them. So he drank Zeus's blood to gain power. As he did, he roared in pain, as if his body was burning. Ares called him a fool for not knowing his place, but instantly Hercules awoke such great power, the god stood stunned. He now possessed the strength of Zeus himself. In just moments, he defeated all the divine soldiers, standing alone before Ares, engaging in a fierce exchange. At that moment, Zeus, seeing what happened, offered to make him a god. Hercules accepted if Zeus swore never to harm humanity again. Zeus agreed, but tasked Hercules to guide men on the path of justice. Thus, Hercules ascended to the pantheon, saying goodbye to his best friend to embrace his divine destiny. For 4,000 years, the gods stopped meddling in human affairs, and Hercules became one of them as Zeus's son. This is the story Ares told the other gods. Meanwhile, in the arena, Hercules fought Jack the Ripper as equals. The killer turned his weapon into a boomerang, and with a rain of knives, forced Hercules to defend non-stop. Wounded, yet determined to close in, the demigod advanced until Jack leapt into the air, dodging his attack. There he revealed the trap, invisible piano wires set during the fight, knives stuck to them, launching a true deadly rain. Hermes feared Hercules would perish against such offense, but unlike humanity's supporters, Hercules' friends directly cheered him on. Then, Hercules deflected daggers, unlocking his sixth feat. He transformed the club into a giant eagle that blew hard, sending the knife rain back at Jack. With just his coat, Jack couldn't resist and fell down. A stray knife broke his monocle, revealing his disturbing red left eye. With this eye, he could see the soul's colors and saw a bright gold aura on Hercules, filled with an indomitable will. Fascinated, Jack wanted to kill him just to see what color he'd have after death. Since the killer was completely deranged, Hercules understood nothing. Jack began singing "London Bridge is Falling Down" as a requiem. In his past, Jack was a beggar child on the streets of London, barely picking up scraps when a cook brutally beat him. Thanks to his red eye, Jack saw arrogance in that man's color and, fearing for his life, begged for forgiveness, promising to leave. Holding the scraps, he thought his mother would be happy. His mother, Mary, worked in a brothel, yet treated him kindly. Seeing his wounds, she worried deeply and spent her money on medicine. She always repeated that Jack was her last hope. Through his eye, he saw in her the most beautiful color in the world. When not begging, Jack quietly studied. In the brothel, a woman named Anne felt jealous of Mary because despite being older, clients preferred her, and Anne got no attention. Mary had been pregnant 5 times, but always aborted. She only kept Jack, raising him till he was 12. Anne would say he was an unlucky child growing in that environment, though Jack always smiled, believing he was happiest in the world. Everything changed one day. Returning home, he found her face wrecked by pain. Anne told him the man Mary loved, also Jack's father, announced his wedding to another woman. That man promised when he triumphed he'd return and take them with him, but it was a lie. After that news, Mary sank into despair, stopped loving Jack, and began rejecting him. The boy understood his mother kept him alive only because of the promise made to his father. With his eye, Jack saw his mother's soul become as dark as all the wretches he'd known. Consumed by madness, he decided to free her with his own hands. He saw in her a new color, fear, which he considered the most beautiful. So he stabbed her, ending her life, whispering he loved her. Then, in his delirium, he thought he should give his mother company. going to find his father. The man, frightened, thought he was being stalked, but Jack coldly clarified he came to save him. After stabbing him, Jack sent his father straight to hell to reunite with his mother, taking his hat before vanishing into London's darkness while singing "London Bridge is Falling Down." Jack craved to see the color of fear in Hercules facing death, but he replied that a brave man never shows fear. Jack launched a knife rain, all destroyed by Hercules' club, who cornered him up to Big Ben Tower. When the clock struck the hour, Hercules took it as Jack's funeral bell. He used a hook to climb, but the rope broke, forcing him desperately to climb the steps to save his life. Below, Hercules destroyed the tower's base with his club, tilting it dangerously. Jack managed to grab onto the clock's hand, saving himself from the fall. Then Hercules unleashed his seventh feet, turning his club into a bull. Hamdan predicted Jack would die after that attack, but the killer threw a clock part at Hercules and surprisingly cut his arm. Spectators were shocked. A common weapon had wounded the demigod. At that moment, the truth came out. Jack's real relic wasn't scissors or a weapon bag, but divine gloves that turned anything into a sacred weapon. From the start, Jack had tricked Hercules, setting up the killing blow. Loki discovered it was all part of Brunhilde's plan, who convinced young Valkyrie Locke to become Jack's weapon. She resisted, horrified at the idea of fusing with a killer. But Jack brutally forced her, Brunhilde complicit, not intervening. Gula scolded Brunhilde for her cruelty, but she argued Locke's power was best for Jack, needed for humanity to win. Jack happily celebrated. Now, any London corner, even a simple brick, could become a deadly weapon in his hands. As the gods urged Hercules to resist, Jack ignored their cries, treating them as a requiem for his foe. He feared his son would die, but Zeus punched him to silence him, reminding him Hercules hadn't fallen yet, and inside was a power too great to give up so easily. At that moment, Hercules used his shoulder belt to tie the wounded arm, stopping the bleeding, while still wielding the club to fight Jack with the other hand. With his special eye, Jack saw the demigod's iron will to fight, and surprised, tipped his hat in respect. Hercules, intrigued, asked about that eye that sees emotions. Jack proudly claimed it was a gift from the gods, letting him survive a cruel world, reading feelings of those soon to be his victims. Hercules replied Jack was actually a loser, one who'd given up to that cruel world, becoming a bloodthirsty demon out of vengeance. He added he'd been human before ascending to divinity, witnessing humanity's countless sins, but never stopped loving men, or become someone like Jack, declaring he'd free him from the consuming pain. Then he threw his club in the air, summoning a spatial storm from which emerged the three-headed hellhound. Each head bit parts of Hercules' body. Merging with him, it was his 12th feat, transform and gain Cerberus's power. Zeus warned this power consumed life, only stopping if Jack was completely destroyed. Otherwise, Cerberus would devour Hercules' body. Transformed, Hercules charged, a blow reducing a whole corner to rubble. Jack responded using his divine gloves to turn the remains into weapons, but whatever he transformed was easily pulverized by the demigod. Jack, agile, dodged a punch, leaping behind him. As Hercules struck, Jack used a reinforced manhole cover as a relic to cover himself. Still, the blow shattered the metal, hitting him directly. Ares lamented it wasn't a direct hit, or Jack would have fallen. Sensing danger, Jack fired his hook to keep distance, but Hercules intercepted it mid-air with a punch that slammed him into an iron fence, its bars impaling his body. Jack, in extreme pain, had to tear them off. Hercules warned him not to resist, nowhere to run, but Jack proclaimed all of London was his weapon. Using his coat, he weakened a building's foundations and, with a calculated move, made Hercules' blow launch him far, turning the whole structure into a divine weapon to drop on the demigod. The collapse buried Hercules under tons of debris. The killer's cunning and cruelty astonished everyone, thinking the hero had died, but Hercules emerged from the ruins, defiantly stating, no matter how attacked, he'd always rise with his indomitable spirit. Then Jack, with a disturbing smile, confessed he saw in him the same color as his mother in the past. Jack thought his mother's color was fake, betraying him, while Hercules' represented true love for humanity. Driven mad, he craved to stain Hercules with that color he so admired. The demigod, too, wanted to learn what hue Jack would give him. They slowly approached, and Jack materialized two divine weapons for hand-to-hand combat. The fight was even, though Hercules had only one arm. He focused enormous power. One blow destroyed Jack's shield, sending him flying with a punch to the stomach. Gravely wounded, Jack was vulnerable, so Hercules tried to finish him before the hellhound power completely devoured him. However, Loki noticed Jack was plotting something. The killer just dodged, not seeking distance, preparing the angle and moment to land a final blow. When the time came, he took a metal bay piece to attack Hercules' blind spot, but he dodged and launched it far away. Jack fell to the ground motionless, and everyone thought the fight was over. Gods and humans despised him, except one person still cheering him on. Silence filled the stadium when his somber song, "London Bridge is Falling Down," began. Jack slowly stood, singing his usual requiem, walking to Hercules, looking weakened. He wielded the metal rod to attack, but took a direct punch to the face. Just when it seemed Hercules would finish him, Jack firmly held on with both hands, piercing his body. He declared it was his strongest blow, saved for a righteous god like him. Hercules understood Jack turned his own blood into a divine weapon for the final attack. Though badly hurt, he admitted Jack was still a formidable foe, but the killer confessed he'd lost, because Hercules' indomitable color never faded. In his last moments, the demigod stretched out his arms, embracing Jack, affirming that no matter humanity's sins, he'd always love them. The gods refused to accept his sacrifice while he thanked Brunhilde for the great battle. Then he entrusted her with his will, asking her to use all her strength to save humanity. Thus ended the fourth Ragnarok battle with Jack the Ripper's victory. Still, he carried inside a whirlwind of inexplicable emotions. Locke manifested, asking how he felt after killing a god. Jack replied he'd killed many, but never felt this. Images of Hercules, upright, incorruptible, kept appearing in his mind. If he could make a wish, it would be to meet him again and talk again. Though humanity celebrated his triumph, gods and men repudiated him, deeply regretting the loss of a noble, compassionate god like Hercules. Even Gul was very sad, blaming Brunhilde for being too cruel, letting a killer end Hercules' life. Actually, Brunhilde also felt sorry, but it was necessary to save humanity. Soon after, she returned to the place honoring warriors fallen in Ragnarok. There she placed Hercules' photo beside those already dead, like Lubu and Adam. Offering them wine, she apologized to Hercules, promising when Ragnarok ended, she'd visit him. Meanwhile, the gods were distressed, between sadness and worry, losing 2 fights in a row. Loki recognized one couldn't underestimate a killer like Jack, calculating every move to defeat a god as powerful as Hercules. Besides, that Englishman had fooled everyone, leading them to take him lightly. But Zeus recalled it wasn't a time for arguments, the score tied 2-2. Unleashing his power, he destroyed the observation tower, warning that under no circumstance could they allow the gods to lose the next battle. Loki, on the other hand, was eager to know who'd be humanity's next representative. Then, a young Japanese swordsman named Okita Soji impatiently awaited his turn, his first time seeing so many masters in one place to fight. Since the next duel was still distant, some gods took the chance to stroll and relax. Loki, instead, headed to Valhalla's garden to wait for someone important. That person soon appeared with an extravagant style and a lollipop in his mouth. It was Buddha, a combatant on the gods' side. As soon as they met, they exchanged challenging looks, and Loki expressed his doubts. He didn't understand how the Valkyries could become strong enough to destroy gods. He was convinced someone must be helping them, because the gods would never allow Valkyries to get away with it. Suddenly, he remembered Buddhism had a practice where 2 beings could give each other life to fight together, similar to the Valkyries turning into divine weapons for humans. Buddha listened to his words without understanding much, Loki beating around the bush. So, he cut to the chase, accusing him of betraying the gods. If true, Loki demanded to fight him at once. Amidst the tension appeared the 7 fortune gods, executioners of the sky, proclaiming betrayers would be punished with the fury of heaven and earth. One approached Buddha to judge him, but the enlightened one, annoyed, spat his lollipop right in his hand. The group responded, drawing their weapons to execute him there. Loki, at first, declared Buddha was his prey, not letting anyone touch him, but then sided with the 7 gods to attack him together. Of course, Buddha didn't back down, telling them to come at once. He was enough to face them. Just then, Sasaki Kojiro, freshly healed from his wounds, joined in. After defeating Poseidon, everyone looked at him respectfully. Seeing Buddha about to be group attacked, he offered help. Joining him were the young swordsman Okita Soji and his superior, just arriving. Thus, they sided with Buddha, ready to fight those gods together. Loki showed contempt towards Koiro, not yet fully recovered. Meanwhile, Okita suspected Loki was an evil god, wanting to test himself, but one of the 7 fortune gods stopped him, claiming that was his personal revenge. When that one fired his weapon, Buddha dodged quickly and, by the way, ridiculed him for acting like a child, destroying things. Seeing Buddha was a powerful rival, Loki summoned his weapon, attacking non-stop. However, stepping forward was Okita, deciding his real target was the trickster god. Loki was irritated seeing his weapon cut by Okita, threatening to make his soul disappear. But Okita wasn't intimidated, charging back into the fight. Just then, Zeus appeared, stopping the fight with one blow, preventing the gods from dividing. The armed god remained stubborn, attacking Buddha, but Odin displayed his divine authority, forcing all to stop. Loki, annoyed, bid Buddha farewell, leaving to witness the next fight, one of the 7 gods warning that every traitor would be annihilated. The humans also retreated, nothing left to see. Zeus approached Buddha, reminding him not to cause more problems, but he just laughed loudly, crushing his lollipop, declaring that, in heaven or earth, no one could subdue him. He was the sole supreme being. Zeus ignored him, returning to the arena, though Odin felt slighted and furious, unleashed a power that withered all the garden's trees. At that moment, Gull looked for Brunhild, apologizing for blaming her before, but she comforted her, saying there was nothing to forgive. What mattered was collaborating together to save humanity. Then they went to a secret room, passing several doors until finding the next human warrior. Seeing him, Gold was speechless, thinking he was a lecherous, lazy man, only thinking about eating and sleeping. But really, he was history's greatest sumo wrestler, Raiden Tamamon. Brunhilde woke him with shouts, along with his wives, which annoyed Raiden, who asked to test Brunhilde, though she cut him off at once, reminding him to prepare for the next battle. Raiden curiously asked which Valkyrie would join him, and Brunhilde chose someone special, Ruth, a gigantic, muscular Valkyrie, even bulkier than him. Seeing her, Raiden ran to hug her, fascinated. She was just his type. Ruth, to everyone's surprise, turned into a feminine young woman, leaving even Gold speechless. No one expected the strongest Valkyrie to fall so quickly for Raiden's charms. They merged, ready to fight. The stage turned into an authentic dohyo, a traditional Japanese sumo ring. Then, Heimdall appeared, announcing the 5th battle was about to begin, the score tied 2-2. Both gods and humans desperately wanted to win this clash. From the East Gate appeared humanity's legendary sumo wrestler, Raiden, a man of enormous stature and perfectly defined muscles. Hearing the crowd chant his name, he rejoiced, seeing that the love for sumo was still alive. From the West Gate entered the god's representative, a deity capable of creating worlds at will, then destroying them for fun, the god of destruction from India, Shiva. Finally, his turn to show power after many waiting fights, and even Zeus wanted him to fight well, preventing the gods from suffering 3 defeats in a row. Heimdall then announced the official start of Ragnarok's 5th battle. Cheering for Shiva were his wives, accompanied by his eldest son, elephant-shaped. Amid war drums, Shiva promised to destroy Raiden in an instant, but he was disconcerted seeing a frog also appearing before him. It seemed an attempted fight at a disadvantage, but in reality, the frog only brought a handful of salt for Raiden. The wrestler threw the salt in the air, then joined his palms tightly as part of an ancient sumo ritual, igniting his fighting spirit. Immediately, Raiden jumped with incredible speed, smashing both feet in Shiva's face. Though the god stepped back, he managed to keep his balance, rising instantly. Shiva admitted that blow was impactful and worth waiting so long for a worthy opponent. Raiden attacked again with an uppercut that Shiva stopped, but the human used his other hand to land another blow, stunning him. Then, Raiden sought to end the fight with a devastating knee, though Shiva blocked it easily with his multiple arms. Next, Shiva used 2 arms to hold Raiden, and with the other 2, unleashed a flurry of punches to his chest, leaving him breathless. To top it off, the god began mocking with provocative gestures, increasing Raiden's fury. The fight between humans and gods reached maximum tension, the crowd roaring with excitement. Shiva even enjoyed the Colosseum atmosphere, while Raiden prepared to unleash all his power. In a flashback, it was recalled that at age 3, Raiden couldn't stand, distressing his parents who only prayed for his health. One day, returning home, they found him trying to walk by himself, but then all his bones shattered under the pressure of his own muscles, trembling uncontrollably. His strength was so enormous that his muscles literally destroyed his skeleton. Since then, even with his mother constantly bandaging his arms and legs, he kept training daily to walk. Over time, his muscles evolved, generating new fibers, acting like a shield to contain that overflowing force, fibers known as the 100 marks. Now, in the arena, Raiden was ready to release those muscular bonds to face the god of destruction, contracting his body to the limit, even knowing he could be crushed by his own power at any moment. The god Shiva thought Raiden had gone mad, but he didn't know that, within him, the Valkyrie helped him control his rebellious muscles. Then, Raiden completely released his body's bonds, stabilizing his uncontrolled fibers. According to Brunhilde, he was the man with the most powerful musculature of all humanity. Now was the time to fight with all his might. Before attacking, Raiden warned Shiva not to fall too quickly. Then he threw a punch, forcing the god to use all 4 arms to block. Without a breather, he continued with a rain of blows that made him back up. Taking advantage of the momentum, Raiden landed a right to Shiva's chin, sending him sprawling. In the stands, the sumo wrestlers burst with pride at that demonstration, while the gods looked worried by the impact Shiva received. When Raiden approached to finish, he tried a headbutt, but Shiva blocked with his own skull, just as hard. Then he countered with blows to Raiden's abdomen and face, forcing him back. Shiva made it clear his head was as resistant as the fighters. Afterwards, he rushed forward with his 4 arms, unleashing a fierce combination that Raiden could barely contain. In a lapse, Shiva managed to connect 2 devastating punches to his abdomen. It seemed Raiden would fall, but suddenly grabbed one of the god's arms and using all his strength, crushed it, making Shiva scream in pain. He almost lost the arm, if not kicking him. The gods couldn't believe their feared god of destruction was being dominated by a human. Moreover, Raiden's muscles had already completely stabilized, returning him total control of his body. His overwhelming strength made the gods start praying for Shiva's victory. Those closest to him knew, however, that the god of destruction hadn't yet shown all his power. With his supporters' cheers resounding, Shiva raised his arm, assuring he could still continue. Gathering energy, he launched a punch at Raiden, but his body was unbalanced by the damaged arm. Leaving a gap in his defense, Raiden hit him squarely in the face. Shiva responded with a blow so brutal it sunk Raiden's arm, revealing that, in that punch, he carried the strength of 11-16 gods. Even so, Raiden wasn't intimidated, continuing to launch a flurry of blows to Shiva's face. Amid the brutality, they both grabbed each other's heads, beginning a series of headbutts to see who was more resistant. That's when Shiva remembered he hadn't felt so much passion in an arena fight for 1,000 years. In the ancient times of the Hindu pantheon, there were many gods who fiercely competed for power, none managing to impose on the others. In a secluded forest lived 2 unknown deities, Shiva and Rudra. While Shiva spent his days lazing, Rudra trained disciplinedly to become stronger. Despite their opposite personalities, they were great friends in a divine world plagued by rivalries. They couldn't avoid fighting in battles against other gods, and in each fight, fighting side by side, they considered each other closest friends. Unlike Shiva, who only thought of having fun, Rudra always carried a burning dream. Hearing that, Shiva laughed loudly, believing only humans needed to dream, while gods didn't. But Rudra confessed he wanted to reach the Hindu pantheon summit, from where he could contemplate landscapes no one else had seen. However, he feared doing it alone would be too lonely, so he invited Shiva to accompany him. Though Shiva wasn't interested in reaching the top, he accepted because every moment with Rudra was fun. Thus, the 2 fools began the arduous road to the divine realm's highest point. At first, everyone despised and mocked them, but little by little, they defeated many powerful gods blocking their way. Those who looked at them with disdain ended up respecting them. On the way, they faced countless battles, and each time they defeated a god, they inherited not only his title, but also the dream he carried. It was a journey full of difficulties, but none were intimidated. Shiva celebrated each victory with joyful dances, while Rudra remained serious, aware Shiva was stronger, and sooner or later, they'd have to face each other. Finally, after defeating the god of creation and the protective god, they achieved the feat of defeating 11-15 deities in total, reaching the Hindu pantheon's summit. I was thrilled to be in such a glorious place, but Rudra remained pensive and somber, convinced that only the strongest of all deserved it. The fallen gods in his hands had asked Rudra never to be defeated, so true to that mandate, he challenged Shiva to a final fight. Shiva knew nothing could stop his friend once he made up his mind, so he had no choice but to accept. They unleashed a colossal fight, whose blows echoed throughout the Hindu territory. The sweat falling from their bodies became a torrential rain. Although Shiva knocked him down again and again, Rudra always got up, determined to fight until the very end. Shiva, desperate, begged him to stop fighting because if it continued like this, one of the two would surely die. Seeing Rudra's obstinacy, Shiva had no option but to surrender, but Rudra knew that his friend had held back his blows. Therefore, he declared that the true victor was Shiva. At that moment, the 1116 gods who had reached the summit deposited their dreams in Shiva, and Rudra asked him to carry them with him. Since then, Shiva has become the leader of the Hindu gods. Now, Shiva brings all those hopes and dreams to the Ragnarok showdown, which is why he cannot afford to lose against Raiden in this critical battle. Among the spectators were numerous gods from India, including Rudra himself, eager to witness Shiva's fight. Everyone knew that under normal circumstances, Shiva was a kind god, but once in combat, he transformed into a true beast, you see. At that moment, he hit his chest hard and began to execute the so-called war dance. According to Hermes, this was precisely the weapon with which Shiva had managed to unify the entire Hindu pantheon. Immediately, Shiva charged with an impressive speed that prevented Raiden from landing a single hit. On the contrary, Shiva chained a rain of punches against his face. Although Raiden tried to respond with a lion posture, Shiva easily dodged, kicked him in the back, and finished him off with a devastating uppercut, a real knockout blow. Then, he continued spinning, dancing, and hitting non-stop, with such intensity that it seemed that Raiden was being attacked by several enemies at the same time. To resist, Raiden concentrated all his muscle mass in both arms, but Shiva challenged him to test whether his dance was stronger than those muscles. In that instant, his body burned like fire to the rhythm of the war dance. After a series of attacks, Shiva kicked Raiden's arms away, jumped and landed a fiery kick that tore his flesh and left him marked with a burned wound. Seeing that, many gods thought that Shiva had already secured victory in the fifth fight. However, Raiden responded with a dangerous smile, while some believed that humanity was in trouble. The old sumo wrestlers who knew him didn't think the same way, not at all. Seeing that smile, they settled confidently in their seats, saying that the time had come for Raiden to show the true power of a sumo wrestler. Since childhood, Raiden had loved sumo, although it didn't seem like a suitable art for him really. His body was limited by the seal that suppressed his muscles and he couldn't release all of his true power. Even so, he was a beast. With a single push, he had defeated the best fighter in his village. With such tremendous strength, everyone began to fear him, calling him a demon, to the point that nobody wanted to play with him again, you know? Raiden blamed the gods for giving him such a cruel body, but his mother thought differently. She thanked the gods because before her son could walk, she had prayed asking that he have a strong and robust body. That's right. She was convinced that that fearsome force was actually a divine gift. Over time, Raiden grew up as a kind young man in his village. However, a great catastrophe changed his destiny. It changed everything for him. The eruption of Mount Asama destroyed all the crops and caused a famine that claimed many lives. Then, the young man decided to help the weakest. He said goodbye to his parents and set off in search of work to support his people, his community. His path led him to Edo, with the dream of becoming a sumo wrestler and earning enough money to send to his village, a big goal. Although he feared hurting others with his excessive strength, a fighter named Oseki challenged him to measure his skill. Raiden believed that he would dominate him easily, like the boys in his town, but Oseki showed him the technique of an authentic sumo master, knocking him down again and again. After a whole day of fighting, Raiden understood that sumo wasn't easy at all. Thanks to Oseki's guidance, he learned all the fundamentals and trained tirelessly until he became a professional fighter. 2 years later, Raiden was already standing on a prestigious dokyo, ready to demonstrate everything he had learned. Although Raiden didn't have the typical bulky body of the other fighters, he managed to defeat many of the best of the Jumo of that time. Oseki thought then that he had created an authentic monster, a true sumo prodigy. From that day on, Raiden became a sumo legend. His fame reached his village, filling his mother and all the inhabitants with pride. However, the glory didn't last too long. Rivals began to fear him and refused to face him. In a fight, Raiden decided to lose on purpose, which angered his teacher greatly. Through tears, he explained that his mother always taught him to protect the weakest, but he felt that he was using his strength only to oppress them. In order not to keep hurting his opponents, he created a list with his 4 most powerful techniques and made them forbidden, avoiding using them. Even so, he continued to accumulate victories and send money to his hometown, of course. Over the years, his sumo career ended due to age, but now he had the opportunity to relive the excitement of combat, this time in front of a formidable rival like Shiva. Raiden decided to release all his power and use his most devastating forbidden techniques. Shiva, excited, waited anxiously to see that strength. Without making him wait, Raiden executed one of his forbidden techniques, the open palm thrust. Channeling all his strength, he launched a brutal blow that pierced Shiva's arms and hit him squarely in the face. The god of destruction was thrown away and lost 2 of his arms in the process. Everyone thought he had fallen, but he got up with only 1 arm left. Zeus explained that if he hadn't blocked, Shiva would have lost his head, because the attack had generated a shockwave capable of breaking the sound barrier. Only a god like him could resist such a blow. Even so, Shiva was seriously injured and Raiden's body also suffered great damage. The technique required a muscle movement at extreme speed, tearing his own tissues. Ruth barely managed to keep his body stable with her power, but Raiden didn't want to stop. He asked Ruth to accelerate his muscles even more, even if it meant completely destroying his body and his organs. He begged because he had sworn to dedicate his life and his existence to sumo. Ruth, moved and proud, accepted. For her, that was the true man she loved. The two merged again into a single being to give their all in the battle. Meanwhile, Shiva looked back and saw his friend Rudra, encouraging him, along with many gods who had placed all their hope in him. He couldn't afford defeat, so he prepared his most powerful technique. He channeled the divine energy of his body, took his heart with the only hand he had left and forced it to beat harder, raising his temperature until it burned like an immense fire. At that instant, both the human and the god had surpassed their limits. Both carried the dreams and hopes of many on their shoulders, and with that absolute determination, they prepared for the final clash that would decide the victory. Immediately, both warriors launched themselves against each other, making the Valhalla arena seem to burn. All the spectators watched with total attention, aware that it was the decisive moment. Raiden used his devastating thrust against Shiva again, but this time it had little effect. The god of destruction remained firm and smiled dangerously, easily dodging each attempt. Instead, when he hit Raiden, the latter's muscles were charred by the heat. Ares warned that if the combat was prolonged, Raiden would have no chance of winning. Hermes, however, pointed out that Shiva was also forcing his body to the maximum to keep the flame burning. If he continued too long, the fire would end up consuming him too. Thus, both were literally burning their own lives in each exchange. In the stands, Raiden's parents and teammates encouraged him with all their might. In the arena, Shiva attacked him relentlessly from all directions, forcing the fighter to resist as he could. Raiden tried to hold him to throw him, but Shiva responded with cunning and counterattacked. Even after receiving countless blows, Raiden refused to fall. Neither his knees nor his hands touched the ground, sustained by the voice of the public chanting his name. With a last effort, Raiden launched a brutal headbutt that made Shiva back down, but keeping the flame for so long had cost him dearly. Another arm of the god detached from his body. Even so, Shiva received the encouragement of his best friend, the god of storms, Rudra. He didn't want to disappoint him, so he launched himself against his rival again, wrapped in a burning glow, while the arena erupted in cheers at such a spectacle. The two carried dreams and hopes of others and faced each other in the greatest battle of their lives. Then came the final moment. Raiden gathered the last strength of his body to execute a final open palm thrust. Shiva, exultant, accepted the challenge and responded with his supreme technique, the Great Fire Kick. The impact split Raiden's arm in two, reducing part of it to ashes. After receiving the blow, Raiden thanked Shiva for giving him an unforgettable fight. Exhausted and without energy, he asked Ruth to release him so he could say goodbye, but the Valkyrie refused, vowing never to abandon the man she loved. Moved, Raiden called her the most wonderful woman in the world. Shiva, witnessing it, recognized him as a true man. With a final movement, Shiva launched the final kick that reduced Raiden to dust, just like that. Even so, the god also thanked him for giving him the best fight of his existence. The soul of Raiden and Ruth fragmented into 1,000 pieces, closing the fifth showdown with the victory of the gods, yes. Those present showed great respect for sumo, and although in a free fight Raiden would never have been a match for Shiva, that day, thanks to the discipline and spirit of a sumo wrestler, he forced the god of destruction to lose 3 arms and was close to taking him to his death, absolutely. In the stands, all the sumo wrestlers mourned the loss of Raiden. As a tribute, they hit the ground in unison, as if it were the tolling of a funeral bell to say goodbye to the great fighter. A somber moment indeed. Shiva, for his part, retired to reunite with his dearest companion, the god of storms Rudra. Other Hindu gods also came to congratulate him on his hard-fought victory. Even Zeus appeared to inquire about his state, and Shiva admitted to him that humanity was really powerful. Gol couldn't contain the sadness for the departure of her closest sister. She was moved to know that Ruth chose to stay with the man she loved. Although everyone knew that that sacrifice was to protect humanity, Gol felt that the price had been too high, too much to pay. Then, Brunhilde remembered Adam's words, "When we protect those we love, we need no other reason." Later, Brunhilde returned to the enclosure where the warriors fallen in Ragnarok are honored, quite sad. There, she placed memories of the names of those who were no longer there. Although outwardly she seemed like a strong sister, inside she felt fragile and always suffered for them. Even so, she was determined to save humanity, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Zeus was looking everywhere for Buddha. Finally, he found him lying down, eating sweets and enjoying the breeze. Zeus, tempted, wanted to try some, but Buddha didn't give him any, and that put him in a bad mood, very bad. Then, he asked him to be the one to fight in the 6th combat. Buddha replied calmly, questioning why the gods were so intent on destroying humans. Zeus replied that if the gods fought, they should win, and they could never allow a defeat at the hands of mortals. But Buddha kept dodging his questions, which ended up infuriating the old god. To calm him down, Buddha leaned in and whispered that he should rather enjoy the next combat quietly. On the other hand, Goln was heading to the infirmary to get bandages to heal Brunhilde's wounds. There she heard a conversation of the 7 gods of fortune. One of them, still resentful with Buddha, warned that a being called Zero would soon appear to punish him. Goln didn't understand who this Zero was, but she was discovered spying and dragged by them to interrogate her. Luckily, Jack appeared in time to save her. Thus, the 6th combat of Ragnarok was about to begin. The next representative of the divine side was presented as a god who in the past had saved humanity, guiding it out of darkness, the very Buddha. However, when appearing in the arena, something strange caught Heimdall's attention. Buddha borrowed the horn of the apocalypse and announced that, instead of fighting for the gods, he would do it in the name of humanity. That unleashed the anger of all the gods present. He even pointed his staff towards Zeus and declared that if the gods didn't think of protecting men, then he would, and anyone who dared to stand in his way would be eliminated. Buddha was a god who had abandoned his family and renounced all worldly desires. In just 6 years, he reached enlightenment, and since then, he had always acted and fought alone. He was known as the Supreme Being, unique in heaven and on earth. Humanity revered him deeply, calling him Buddha, and that day, in Valhalla, he proclaimed with firmness that he was joining the side of men. All the public of the divine side, upon hearing Buddha, began to boo him and throw insults at him, calling him the shame of the gods and demanding that he abandon the combat, but he crushed the trumpet he was holding, imposing absolute silence. Then, he declared that he would fight for humanity and that any god who stood in his way would be eliminated without mercy. The revelation left both humans and gods astonished. Only Shiva and Torno seemed surprised by this. On the other hand, most of the gods showed an uncontainable fury for what they considered a betrayal. Gul was perplexed to see that Buddha was passing to the human side, although Brunhilde, on the other hand, had already foreseen it, you see. She explained that his title of unique in heaven and on earth meant that he had never obeyed orders from anyone. Before the start of the 6th combat, Brunhilde had run into him shortly after crying for the fallen warriors. Buddha, while eating popcorn, asked her why she was crying, and she replied that she was suffering for those fallen in Ragnarok. Without giving importance, he finished the package of popcorn and commented that he had been chosen by Zeus as the divine representative in the 6th combat. However, he made it clear that he would fight for humanity and not for the gods. Noticing a certain indifference in Brunhilde Buddha's reaction, he felt somewhat disappointed. He recalled that before Ragnarok, she had looked for him to ask about the shared rebirth, the technique that allowed humans to unite with the Valkyries to fight. That showed that Brunhilde had already calculated everything from the beginning. That's why he asked her if she had planned to use him against the gods. She denied having had that intention, although she admitted that she knew a truth. Nobody in Valhalla despised the gods as much as Buddha. Upon hearing it, Buddha let out a great laugh, surprised at how much she knew about him. Even so, he warned her that he liked those maneuvers and left, leaving her alone with a deep fear. Now, in the arena, Buddha was on the side of the humans, just as Brunhilde had anticipated. The god Heimdall tried to stop him, alleging that the fighters of the divine side were already registered and he couldn't change from. But Zeus intervened and said that he didn't mind. He explained that although at the beginning of Ragnarok it had been agreed that each side would have 13 fighters, allowing Buddha to fight for humanity would make the battle more exciting. He even declared that he himself would like to go down to the field to face Buddha. Buddha, without showing fear, replied that if Zeus wanted to fight, he would gladly comply. From the stands, Odin asked him if he was willing to earn the eternal hatred of all the gods. Buddha, without flinching, replied that he didn't care about gods or humans because in the universe the only thing that mattered was himself. The insults of the divine public didn't affect him. He remained relaxed, perfectly calm. Loki, on the other hand, was boiling with rage, powerless before Buddha's decision. Then, Buddha asked Zeus who his rival would be in this combat, and the elder god confirmed that the representative of the divine side had already been chosen. At that moment, a golden glow descended from the sky, accompanied by celestial voices that resonated incessantly. A ship shaped like a dragon's head landed in the middle of the Valhalla arena, and from it descended all the members of the 7 gods of fortune. They stood in front of Buddha, while Zeus left everything in the hands of their leader. The god Heimdall was confused, not knowing whom to announce as the representative of the divine side, since he couldn't put the 7 against Buddha at the same time. However, the leader explained that the 7 were not separate entities, but only one. Then, a strange and grotesque fusion began, one by one. The others entered into his body until forming a single figure. According to legend, the 7 gods of fortune were the ones who ruled the good luck of the world. Some said that there was an 8th god, but in reality, that was only a fable. The truth is that there was always only one. When that god descended, the sky darkened and fortune disappeared. That true being had a name, Zero Fuku. As soon as he appeared, Zero declared that he would assassinate Buddha in that very place. How terrible. Then he performed some warm-up movements while Buddha ignored him without giving him importance. Annoyed by that indifference, Zero extracted from his body a terrifying weapon, a huge axe surrounded by tentacles. His monstrous appearance froze the blood of the spectators. Even Ares doubted that a god could exist with such a sinister form. Heindel clarified that Zero was a god capable of transforming misfortune into fortune. His phone received the official notice. The divine representative had been confirmed as Zero. Without further delay, he announced the beginning of the sixth showdown. On the side of humanity, Buddha. On the side of the gods, Zero Fuku. A fearsome pairing. Everything augured a tense and brutal Ragnarok. Ghoul wondered who Zero really was and what that grotesque fusion had been. Brunhilde explained that that was the true form of the seven gods of fortune, the first time she herself witnessed their most powerful state. Originally, Zero had been a god who distributed fortune in all corners, but the misfortunes he carried inside ended up corrupting his mind. In ancient times in Asia, several gods had lived among humans to protect them. Zero Fuku was one of them, a god close to humanity and nature, with a pure and kind heart like no other. But upon descending to the world, the only thing he found was suffering, a tragedy. Humanity was trapped in countless pains and misfortunes. Then, Zero thought that, if he eliminated the root of that misfortune, humanity could be saved. Thus, he approached a child seriously ill and used his power to absorb the disease, carrying that pain himself. Within minutes, that sick child could walk normally and no longer felt pain. Since then, many venerated him as a saving god. Zero's method consisted of absorbing the misfortune of humans to return happiness to them. However, over time, he reached his limit. He had carried so much misfortune that his body began to suffer, although he felt satisfied for having served humanity. Years later, he returned to the village he had once saved, hoping to see its inhabitants living happily. But upon arriving, he discovered his true nature. Instead of gratitude, they showed contempt. He understood that the more he eliminated the misfortune, the less people knew how to value happiness. Even that child he had healed insulted him, treating him like trash. Zero, incredulous, didn't understand how, after carrying so much suffering, those humans were still unable to appreciate true bliss. At that moment, he came across a group of ascetics with a weak and hungry appearance. Zero believed they were seeking his help, but to his surprise, the one guiding them was Buddha himself. Although they were poor and emaciated, their faces radiated immense happiness. Intrigued, Zero stopped him and asked why those people seemed blissful, while those he had helped were not. Buddha, biting on a soybean, explained that happiness is not something that is given as a gift, but something that each person must conquer with their own effort. Whoever longs for bliss must carry a weight equivalent to that desire. That is what the Enlightened One had taught, and it was recorded in the scriptures. His words captivated those present, but in Zero, they only awakened a sense of humiliation, nothing more. Buddha invited him to accompany him if he wanted to understand more, but Zero, in full adolescence, took it as an affront. Full of rage and jealousy, he fled crying, convinced that he deserved more devotion than anyone, because he had saved many without ever receiving recognition. Rancor replaced love in his heart, and he began to hate humanity. Shortly after, some people saw him and mistook him for a demon. When they recognized him, they fled in terror. Zero pursued them, willing to kill a mother and her son, but upon looking at the child's face, he felt immense pain. His body emitted a blinding light and fragmented into 7 parts. Thus were born the 7 incarnations known as the 7 gods of fortune, emerged to contain his fury before he destroyed humanity. Since then, they swore revenge against Buddha for having humiliated him. The legend began to speak of the 7 gods and a supposed 8th. Now, having reunited again in a single body, Zero has returned, and at that moment intends to face Buddha to wash that affront from the past. But before he could finish his speech, Buddha launched a kick directly into his abdomen and told him that he didn't even remember who he was. The unexpected blow left without time to react and made him writhe in pain, convinced that Buddha had cheated, really. However, Hermes clarified that the rules were clear. Once the fight was announced, everything was allowed, regardless of the method. Enraged, Zero wielded his war axe, whose tentacles stirred as if it were a living being. He launched violent cuts everywhere, but Buddha dodged easily, not allowing the blade to graze him. The gods who were observing began to worry. Zero only limited himself to waving his weapon without getting a single hit. He, on the other hand, justified his failure, saying that he was too unfortunate to be able to reach him. The fury grew so much that the axe was covered in eyes and increased in size, truly terrifying. Zeus explained that that weapon, called Ono no Fuko, absorbed misfortune. The more it accumulated, the bigger and more destructive it became. Zero wielded the enormous axe with such force that he managed to split the grandstand in 2. Brunhilde commented that every time Zero missed a blow, he considered it another misfortune, which fueled his weapon even more. In other words, the more Buddha dodged, the more powerful the axe became. After dodging for a good while, Buddha put himself upside down and began to clap with his feet, provoking Zero's anger even more. Gold asked how it was possible that he could dodge so much, and Brunil explained that unlike Kojiro, who did it by experience and technique, Buddha could foresee the attacks before they happened. That was the gift of an enlightened being, the ability to see the future. Zero, frustrated, shouted without understanding why he couldn't reach him. Then, Buddha approached and struck him with his staff in the mouth, saying that he only attacked when he felt like it. Then, he continued dodging and hitting with total ease, showing him the abysmal difference in power. Faced with Buddha's illumination, Zero's attacks were useless. Impotence only fueled his hatred even more, and a dark energy sprouted from his body. Before everyone's eyes, the axe was transformed into a colossus that encompassed the entire Valhalla arena, with 7 blades loaded with Zero's accumulated misfortune. Buddha understood that he wouldn't be able to dodge such an attack, so he remained still. From his staff, he invoked the power of the Wheel of Reincarnation, releasing the sutras. Zero unleashed his blow, devastating the arena as if everything were destroyed. The spectators believed that Buddha had died under that attack, but then he deployed the Baloki Tejvara technique of the 11 faces, transforming his staff into a gigantic shield that protected him from the impact. Buddha stopped Zero's axe blow with his shield and told him that this time he would cure his adolescence disease. According to Brunilda, Buddha's shield was the divine weapon of the 6 kingdoms, where each kingdom was protected by an Avalokiteshvara. The form of that weapon changed according to Buddha's emotions. At that moment, the shield diverted Zero's colossal axe, although his fury continued to increase, which made his weapon mutate even more. Then, Buddha invoked the second technique of the 6 kingdoms. His weapon was transformed into a mass of nails. With it, he dodged Zero's attack and landed a direct blow in his stomach, making him fall to the ground, writhing in pain. Faced with this, Brunilda recognized that Buddha was the strongest young man in all of history. From his birth, Buddha had had everything. He was a prince of the small kingdom of Maya in northern ancient India. He grew up in luxury with the best education, and the gods themselves had designated him as the future king of the world. His father felt proud of his son's brilliant destiny, and the people adored him, hoping that one day he would accept being their sovereign. Sometimes Buddha wished to be free like a bird without ties, but he repressed those thoughts because he believed that he should fulfill his destiny. Everything changed when he visited his cousin, King Yataka. Although he was now a monarch, Buddha wanted to continue calling him older brother, as in his childhood. He confessed that one day he would replace his father as king of Maya, because that was the destiny he had to carry. Buddha thought that being king would be the greatest happiness, but Yataka confessed the opposite. He had dedicated all his life to the people, and now, sick and near death, he regretted not having been able to experience many things in life. Shortly after, Yataka passed away. In the midst of mourning, people said that he had had a full life, but Buddha shuddered upon understanding that in reality, he had not been happy. That contradiction awakened in him a revelation. Suddenly, Buddha began to laugh with a freedom that made everyone think that he had gone mad. Pointing to the sky, he proclaimed that he had understood the truth. During the funeral, instead of showing sadness, he threw flowers as if celebrating. Then he took Yataka's coffin on his shoulders. His father, horrified, feared that the gods would punish him, but Buddha ordered silence and said that Yataka didn't need prayers of happiness, because true happiness is born from one's own heart. And as in life, Yataka had always wanted to know how far the river of his kingdom reached. Now Buddha would fulfill that wish by taking him to travel all its course. Since then, Buddha abandoned his native land, his family, and his wife and son, beginning a solitary path on his own accord. In his journey, he met many ascetics who, blinded by faith, starved themselves believing that they would thus reach enlightenment. But, upon hearing Buddha's words, they left behind those superstitious rites and began to live with freedom. From that moment, everything that Buddha did was challenge the destiny imposed by the gods on men. Now he was the strongest young man, at the top of rebellion, and any god who tried to stop him would be defeated. That was his goal. In the Combat Zero, no matter how much he tried, he couldn't land a single blow. He transformed then his weapon into a sword of 3 sections, while Buddha used the weapon of the 6 to transform it into the axe of the 12 heavens. The fight became a true clash of weapons, with both attacking equally. Thanks to his power to foresee the movements, Buddha dodged easily and responded with precision. Taking advantage of an oversight, he gave a crossed cut to Zero, who bled profusely. The misfortune inside him grew, and his weapon transformed into a storm of axes. 1,000 blades targeted Buddha, but he changed his weapon again, turning it into an ancient sword. With great swordsmanship and evasion, he destroyed Zero's offense and neutralized every attack, closing in on him. In the stands, everyone thought Buddha had complete dominance, infuriating Zero, who always felt ignored, unlike Buddha, who received all the attention. Again and again, he changed weapons, but nothing could stand against the gift of foresight. It was then that Buddha calmly advised him, as if speaking to a teenager. First, he needed to learn to love himself, and then others would love him too. Zero considered those words empty, but seeing Buddha's radiant light, something inside him illuminated. His axe vanished, and in his heart, the desire to be loved like Buddha was born. Ares, astonished, couldn't believe Zero had been enlightened. Satisfied, Buddha threw his weapon to the ground and invited Zero to a fair fight with their bare hands. Zero accepted enthusiastically, and both launched into hand-to-hand combat in the middle of Ragnarok. Although he received many blows, Zero felt incredibly happy. He had never experienced such bliss before. Finally, Buddha landed a punch directly on his face, knocking him down. The darkness inside Zero dissipated, revealing the cheerful countenance of a true god of fortune. Now, he wanted to travel the world, bringing happiness to everyone he met. But suddenly, horns embedded themselves in his head, eliciting a scream of pain. Buddha still didn't understand what was happening when both horns completely sank into his body. Then, from Zero's mouth and chest, two dragons emerged, one blue and one red. Both dragons writhed dangerously in the air before launching directly at Zero, who desperately asked Buddha for help. However, the wind generated by those beasts was so strong that even he couldn't intervene, and he could only watch as they enveloped Zero's body. After a few minutes, the storm subsided, and in the center of the arena, a massive dragon egg appeared. From it emerged a grotesque creature, forcing Buddha to step back to keep his distance, as he didn't know its origin or its capabilities. When the blood covering it dissipated, it became clear that it was the demon king of the sixth hell, Hajun. Brunhilde and Gaul, seeing him, were terrified, not knowing who or what it was. Buddha asked what had happened to Zero, and Hajun replied that he had vanished completely, ceasing to exist. Now, he only desired to unleash all the power burning within him. The gods witnessing this also didn't know if it was truly a deity until Hades intervened, assuring them that it wasn't a god. His mere presence made Ares tremble, who yielded his seat to him. Hades had come after the defeat of his brother Poseidon. When asked where this being came from, he explained that Hajun was a wrathful warrior born from the underworld. There are three planes of existence: heaven, the abode of gods and souls, the world of men, and the underworld, where the condemned reign. According to a legend, when dazzling light merges with absolute darkness, the horns of hell awaken, and the demon king Hajun arises, whom even Hades had never seen before. Not even he could explain how Zero had ended up transforming into such a creature. On the battlefield, Hajun recognized that he wasn't yet accustomed to his new body. He then created a sharp blade, warning that perhaps he could end Buddha in an instant. The blade, of unimaginable weight, forced Buddha to use all his strength to resist. What followed was a sword duel at breakneck speed. Gaul doubted Buddha could resist, but Brunhilde explained that although he could see the future, at that moment his vision was blocked. Normally, Buddha's enlightened eyes distinguish the radiance of souls, since they move before the body when executing an action, but Hajun's soul was completely shrouded in darkness, without the slightest light, rendering Buddha's clairvoyance useless. Even so, the enlightened one fought equally, showing no fear. Realizing that his rival was no ordinary one, Hajun decided to fight with all his might. He transformed his sword into a giant drill and launched himself against him. To block it, Buddha used the 6 realms to transform his weapon into a shield. The impact shook all of Valhalla, but finally the drill pierced the defense, piercing one of Buddha's eyes. Upon injuring the enlightened one, the demon king let out a frenzied laugh. No one could believe it. That same shield had previously stopped Zero's axe, but now it had been easily pierced by Hajun's weapon. At first, Hajun tried to pierce Buddha's head, but he managed to dodge in time. Then, the demon transformed his weapon into an axe and began to attack relentlessly, forcing Buddha to defend himself with great difficulty. Seeing him cornered filled Loki with jubilation. Taking advantage of the fact that Buddha no longer had his left eye, Hajun concentrated his blows in that direction, muttering incoherent phrases like a madman. Little by little, Buddha was at a disadvantage against the fury of the demon king. According to Hades, no god was a match for Hajun, because in the past he had destroyed half of the underworld. The other half survived only because he disappeared suddenly. For centuries, Hades had ruled without seeing him again, even believing it was just a myth. If he had reappeared, Hades deduced, it was because someone recovered his remains, cultivated them like a seed, and implanted them in Zerofuku's body. Hades, horrified, asked which god could be so perverse, and Hades pointed out that it was most likely Beelzebub, who at that moment was watching Buddha's battle in Ragnarok through a screen. In the arena, Buddha was being completely dominated. His body was full of wounds from Hajun's cuts, while the gods in the audience celebrated, cheering the demon on to finish him off. It was then that Buddha asked him if Zero still existed inside him. Hajun burst into laughter, revealing that he had devoured him completely and fed on his energy. Hearing this, Buddha burst into fury and vowed to destroy him in that very Valhalla. Moved by hatred, his staff changed to the 5th of the 6 paths, called the 1,000 Arms of Avalokiteshvara. The weapon transformed into a gigantic scythe called the War Scythe of the Golden God, a form that even he had never seen before. The gods were surprised, as such a weapon didn't seem fitting for someone so compassionate. But Buddha didn't hesitate and wielded the scythe with a technique of annihilation of the cycle of reincarnation. Although Hajun managed to block it, he was pushed violently backward. Without giving up, he deflected the weapon and counterattacked, while Buddha increased the speed of his scythe and launched himself at him again. The clash left everyone speechless, thinking that Buddha was about to be defeated. Hajun, confident, asked him if he had any last wishes. This enraged Buddha, who reminded him that he would never forgive anyone who tried to prevent him from saving humanity. Despite his serious wounds, he plunged the scythe into the demon's arm, causing intense pain that forced him to kick it away. Hajun didn't understand how he could still be alive after that impact, and when he began to tremble, Buddha provoked him, saying that he seemed about to pee himself out of fear. Wounded in his pride, the demon roared and shouted at him to remember his place. In the past, Hajun had been destroyed by the same enormous power he carried inside, but now his body had evolved beyond that weak form from before. Even so, Buddha pointed at him without hesitation and told him that he was still too weak, even weaker than Zerofuku. Those words enraged the demon, who forced him to prove it by launching a series of frenzied attacks. Gravely injured, anyone would think Buddha was finished, but his only remaining eye revealed otherwise. He hadn't given up yet. He was preparing a decisive move. Despite the blows received, he remained standing, with his body covered in wounds. From above, Hades noticed something strange. Although Hajun had the advantage, his body was trembling unusually. To regain control, he tore off his left arm and transformed his weapon into an immense sword, ready to continue the fight. Buddha, showing no fear, advanced head-on and executed another technique of annihilation of the cycle. Hajun's force shattered Buddha's scythe, causing his staff to return to its original form. Not satisfied, the demon charged again, breaking the staff and throwing Buddha into the air. Seeing him fall, Beelzebub believed the battle was over and smiled with satisfaction. Meanwhile, several people prayed fervently, wishing that Buddha would find the strength to win. In the midst of despair, a light emerged beside him. Extending his hand, Buddha touched something crucial that made him smile with joy. His laughter left everyone present perplexed. Hajun thought he had lost his mind, but soon they saw him stand up again with total confidence. Standing, he let his long hair flow and revealed a weapon, Zerofuku's axe, which had been left behind before being absorbed by the demon. Now, that axe didn't absorb misfortunes, but the love of humanity that Buddha carried inside. Transformed into an authentic divine treasure, it was a supreme weapon that only someone enlightened could forge. The axe transformed into a colossal sword of great extinction, radiating a blinding light that provoked Hajun's fury. That blade contained all the power of the 7 lucky gods, and Buddha declared that with it, the Demon King would finally be punished. With his new weapon, he faced Hajun equally, this time in balanced conditions. From the stands, the spectators roared with enthusiasm, and even his cousin Yataka appeared to encourage Buddha on his path to victory. At that moment, Hajun began to tremble, seeing that Buddha still hadn't given up despite being exhausted. To make matters worse, he was smiling as if he were enjoying the battle. He then deflected his rival's weapon and landed a direct cut on his chest. Although he was managing to turn the fight around, everyone noticed that his wounds were too serious and they feared he would fall before he could land the final blow. In the arena, Buddha continued attacking and defending against the Demon King's onslaught. Taking advantage of a carelessness, he launched another slash against his torso, although it wasn't deep enough, leaving him with a bitter taste. He seemed to be at his limit, but then his eye, capable of perceiving souls, activated again, allowing him to dodge Hajun's movements. According to Hades, normally, the demon's soul was covered by darkness, but his fear had begun to seep through, revealing his inner light. Thus, the one who had once devastated the underworld was cornered. Furious, Hajun unleashed a brutal blow that seemed to split Buddha in two, but in reality, he had only hit an illusion. The enlightened one was already at his back. Raising his sword, Buddha whispered Zerofuku's name, affirming that this was the path they would travel together, and launched the final slash. The demon's body fragmented into pieces under humanity's ovation. With his last strength, Hajun tried to counterattack with his drill, but it was useless. His soul vanished, and Zerofuku reappeared briefly to thank Buddha before ascending to paradise with the 7 lucky gods. Buddha, smiling, said goodbye and raised his arm, celebrating his victory. The 6th battle of Ragnarok had ended with the triumph of Buddha and humanity. After the combat, he was immediately taken to receive medical attention, while Brunhilde thanked him for bringing men one step closer to victory. Elsewhere, Beelzebub was disappointed by the demon's defeat, but then Odin appeared to remind him that he shouldn't interfere in these fights that he himself had longed for so much. The score was now 3-3, and the gods planned with all their might to win the next showdown. It was then that Hades presented himself and offered himself as the next contender, determined to avenge the defeat of his brother Poseidon. Hearing this, Brunhilde became worried. If the king of the underworld was going to fight, then a king had to present himself on the human side as well. That man was none other than the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Tearing down the walls of the Valhalla arena, he appeared, proclaiming that wherever he passed, a path would open there. With this concludes the review of the 2 seasons of the Great War between humans and gods. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.